Hello everyone, and welcome to another mod spotlight. So today's mod is for The Witcher 3, and it is called The Witcher 3 Enhanced Edition by Reapers. And Enhanced Edition really doesn't do this mod justice, as it changes just so many mechanics and so many aspects of the game that it is truly hard to grasp the scale of it. From rescaling all monsters, quests, and rewards, to completely overhauling the meditation and potion system, and rebalancing and even adding some new mechanics to the game, such as a better dodging and combat system, reworking all signs and skills, and even changing how stamina, adrenaline, and the new stat Vigor all work in tandem with health and toxicity. But without getting too ahead of ourselves, let's go ahead and get started with how to install the mod, as it is a little more involved than installing a mod for Skyrim and probably requires a tutorial. Now, before we begin, I would like to state that one thing that makes this mod amazing is its versatility. Everything I will be discussing in this mod spotlight can either be changed or toggled to the player's needs, so keep that in mind as we move forward. That being said, the mod author has already set recommended defaults for all these settings, so be sure to test them out before changing them to something different. Also, keep in mind that this video will be broken into sections, since there is so much to this mod, and you can switch between those sections with the on-screen annotations or with the marked times down in the description. Now, with that all out of the way, let's get started with the installation. Alright, here is the installation part of this video, and installing a mod for The Witcher 3 is not too bad. It's a little more involved than installing one for Skyrim, so that is the reason for this tutorial. So the first thing you'll need to do is go to the Nexus page down in the description, and you will want to download the most up-to-date file from the file section. And once you do that, you can then go over to Computer, Downloads, and open your Witcher 3 Enhanced Edition with WinRAR or 7-zip, and you will find these two in there. So the first one says drop into the Witcher 3 root folder. You will typically find that folder under your C drive, Program Files x86, Steam, Steam Apps, Common, and it will usually be here. But because I have it installed on a different drive, it will be under my Games drive, under Games, Steam Apps, Common, and then there it is. So we'll simply open that, and then we'll go over here, we will open this, we will drag and drop, just like that. And you will go ahead and merge, and you will also replace for any that they ask. Now notice that this says input.xml. Now, if you have another mod that is going to be changing this, you will want to make the changes to input.xml manually, otherwise they will no longer work, so bear that in mind as we move forward, but you will simply move and replace, and that's it for that. Then you will go over to your documents, and you will scroll down to The Witcher 3, and you will see the input.settings file, and that is where the next file here comes into play. README or your PC will blow up. You should probably read it, otherwise your PC will blow up. And as you see, these are input files. Now, if these are not editable by Notepad immediately, what you can do is you can go down to Properties, and then you can change it here to be Notepad. And once you've done that, make sure it's not set to read only, hit Apply and OK. Then you should be able to open this, and then we can go over, open this. And all you really need to do is just highlight this bottom section here, starting with Scene. Go ahead and hit Control-C and copy and paste it over here. Kind of like that. Then you just save the file and close out of it, and your mod should now be installed. If you had any problems, be sure to leave a comment, and perhaps I will be able to help you out. Alright, now that your mod is properly installed, let's go ahead and get started with the new stats and abilities, starting with the changes to stamina. So, stamina has been changed from the original game in such a way that it is no longer used to cast signs. Instead, stamina now acts as the major resource for all melee and dodging abilities. All attacks will now cost a bit of stamina, light attacks being very fast and costing minimal, while heavy attacks are very slow, cost a lot of stamina, but they do a lot more damage. Dodging will now also cost a bit of stamina, but not nearly as much as attacking, so you're still pretty much freely able to dodge enemies. Just be wary of how much you do, because stamina will also affect your attack speed and damage. As you lose stamina, your attack damage will gradually lower, up to about 30% reduced damage, making it a vital resource for any combat encounter when attempting to use your melee weapons. Keep in mind, stamina usage for any action will be largely affected by the type of armor you are wearing. Wearing lighter armor will consume the least amount of stamina, however, heavy armor will consume the most, so you will want to stay mindful of the type of armor you are wearing, as it will massively affect combat. Stamina regeneration has also been heavily changed and will now largely depend on your current health and toxicity. If you have lower health and higher toxicity, your stamina will regenerate astonishingly slower than if you had full health and no toxicity, making any hits in combat deadly, as it can drastically change your stamina regen. Now that we've covered the changes to stamina, let's move on to the new stat Vigor, which will now be used for casting signs. So, Vigor is the stat that will now govern everything from attack speed, damage, sign intensity, and even a few skills like Flood of Anger and Undying. You will have a maximum of 3 charges of Vigor, and for each charge you will be able to cast a single sign. But be careful of how much you do, because for each charge of Vigor you lose, you will do 10% less attack damage, and you will have 15% less sign intensity, making Vigor a very powerful resource to use wisely, as you can be greatly weakened without it. Now, Vigor will naturally regenerate, similar to how stamina regenerates, but it will be much slower. Keep in mind though that this is also greatly affected by your health and toxicity, the same way stamina is, so taking damage while in combat can be very dangerous and quickly lead to your death. That's pretty much it for the new stat Vigor, so let's move on to the changes in Adrenaline. Now, Adrenaline isn't nearly as important as stamina, but it can still be very powerful, as it now acts as a small boost to your stamina and Vigor regen for every point you have. Now, obviously this can be very useful, but you could just as easily lose all your Adrenaline as quickly as you gain it. Basically, it works as a combo counter, so every hit you get on an enemy will stack onto your Adrenaline. However, the moment you get hit, you will lose all of it. So it can be pretty challenging to actually stack a lot of Adrenaline. However, it can be extremely useful if you actually manage to do so, as it will give you the upper edge in pretty much any fight. So obviously, it's just best not to get hit as a general rule of thumb. Moving on to the next new stat is Poise, which is the resistance to being staggered by blockable attacks. Each point of Poise acts as a % more resistance to stagger, which, believe it or not, can actually be quite useful when drinking potions or attempting special attacks like Whirl or Rend mid-combat. Poise is gained from armor, potions, toxicity, and momentum. Different armor types will each give a different amount of Poise, light armor giving the least while heavy armor gives the most, which really only makes sense. Some potions will now also increase your Poise, which can be quite handy, and having heightened toxicity will increase your Poise as well, meaning that you now can build a character who chugs a lot of potions before battle and wears heavy armor only to never be staggered. Lastly, momentum. Momentum is gained from sprinting, dodging, running, or simply just using your weapon, and it gives a small boost to Poise. So it can be quite useful to actually sprint around and dodge while in combat, as it will prevent you from being staggered. And the final stat is attack speed, which may not seem like something new, but there was nothing for it originally. Now, however, it is an actual stat, and obviously it affects how quickly you strike enemies, and as you may have guessed, it is also affected by many of the other stats as well. Health and stamina, for example, will now affect your attack speed, so as you lose either of those, your attack speed will slightly lower. Certain skills combined with vigor will also improve your attack speed dependent on the type of attack you are using and how much vigor you currently have. So again, it will be vitally important to think about your use of vigor, as it has once again been shown to be invaluable. Lastly, the type of armor you wear will determine your attack speed. As you wear lighter armor, it will actually increase, but when you wear heavier armor, it will be decreased. So now you can either choose between being a heavily armored tank, or you could be a lightly armored ninja. So feel free to experiment with these new stats and features and see how they all function together and find something that you enjoy. Well, that's pretty much all the changes as far as the stats and abilities are concerned, so let's move on to the new skills and signs. So quite a few skills have actually remained unchanged, but for the most part all of the melee and general skills have now been reworked to fit with the new game mechanics and the stats, and they all now have their own unique descriptions that dynamically change as you increase them or other skills that may affect them. That being said, pretty much all the descriptions have changed, so be sure to read all of the new skills and everything that there is under the character sheet and in the skills menu to be sure you know which skills are which and how they will affect the new stats and abilities. The signs, however, have actually been changed a great deal, and for the most part they are way better and much more balanced than they were in the original game. Igni, for example, now deals more balanced damage while always staggering your opponent, meaning you will no longer just be able to destroy everything with fire, but it still will remain quite useful in combat. Ard will now always stagger your opponent and is now more easily able to knock back your enemy than in the vanilla game, making it a much more worthwhile sign to use and can even become quite powerful later on. Quen has now been balanced and will no longer act as a one-use shield of invincibility. It is now an extra shield that will block up to a certain amount of damage that is heavily dependent on your overall health and sign intensity. Any damage over that will cause Quen to break and you will absorb the remaining damage. However, Exploding Shield has now been buffed so that it will always knock back your enemy and will cause significantly more damage. Axii will no longer always work, and it has a chance to only stagger your opponent instead of stunning them, though the effects of Axii will last much longer now, so it still will be quite useful. Finally, Yrden will now slow your enemy more while also dealing more damage if you spec into the appropriate skill for it, and it is overall far more useful than it used to be, and I highly recommend using it in pretty much all combat situations. That all being said, Petrie's filter has now also been significantly buffed and will now properly overpower all signs when you are using it, so when casting signs they will always use the best effect while also dealing more damage, and overall it's just far more useful and all the signs work a lot better in my opinion, and they're absolutely necessary for pretty much all encounters. So, combat has now been massively changed, as there are now many new things to take in consideration before picking a fight with something. For example, there is now animations for both oiling your sword and drinking potions, so it isn't the wisest choice to do that mid-combat now. Keep in mind that animations for drinking a potion is slightly sped up while in combat, so you're still able to do it, but I really wouldn't recommend trying. You also now need to consider your fighting style and which signs to use against certain types of creatures, and you need to either prioritize vigor regen or powerful potions. That all being said, let's start by looking at the changes to dodging. So the first major thing to consider in combat is the changes to dodging. Dodging has now been massively nerfed, so you can still actually be hit while dodging for partial or even full damage. You now need to either completely dodge the attack to take no damage, or you have to dodge within a 70-degree cone in front of your target to take reduced damage. Otherwise, if you are not within that 70-degree cone, you will still take the full incoming damage. So keep that in mind, as dodging will be quite a bit more challenging now. Now, if you put skill points into fleet-footed, you will be able to increase the size of this cone in front of your target, and you will also be able to increase the speed of your dodging, so it is actually quite useful to invest points into, but it still will be more challenging than the original game, so keep that in mind. Moving on, the next thing to consider is the changes to counterattacks, whirl, and rend. Counterattacks have been changed a fair bit, and you can now choose how each counterattack will affect your opponent, as well as being able to choose a type of counterattack to use on certain types of creatures, meaning you can now experiment with it until you find something you like, and I recommend doing so. Now, when you invest skill points into counterattack, it will increase the strength of it, making it an amazing tactical decision in any encounter, so I highly recommend using that as well. Moving on, whirl and rend are now available for use from the beginning of the game, but they cost a substantial amount of stamina, so investing skill points into their skills will affect how much stamina they use, and a couple more specific effects that you can read for yourself in the skills descriptions. Along with those, the finisher has now also been slightly changed and has an ability called Reaper's Gambit. This pretty much creates a bit more risk while performing finishers, as you can now be actually hit or even killed in the middle of doing one. However, a successfully performed finisher will now grant a small chunk of stamina, so they are actually quite useful if you can manage one safely. And that's pretty much it for changes to attacking, so let's go ahead and move on to changes to health, damage, and armor. So to start, pretty much everything's health and damage has been rebalanced to make for a lot faster encounters, so pretty much everything will deal a lot more damage to you. However, you will also deal a lot more damage to them, meaning that as long as you perform well, you should be able to kill everything with minimal problems, but the moment you make a mistake, you will be brutally murdered. Enemies will now also have an improved AI that will act more aggressively and will be a bit more intelligent when it comes to dodging and parrying, so you will have to use your signs and sidearms to get the upper advantage at times. All of these multipliers and changes to health and damage, as well as the changes to AI, are of course customizable. However, I recommend playing with the defaults, as it is already fairly balanced, and changing them may make the game very easy or very hard. That being said, I would also recommend playing on the highest difficulty, as the mod has been balanced to that difficulty, and all others might be a little too easy for you. That being said, let's go ahead and move on to how the armor has now changed. Now, to accommodate for all these added damages, the armor in the game has been reworked to provide more or less protection, which is largely dependent on your current armor rating. The original game would simply subtract the total armor rating from the base damage, and that really wasn't enough for the new multipliers. So now, armor rating will act as a percentage of damage reduction instead of the fixed amount. So now when you take damage, 1/10 of your overall armor rating will act as a percentage decrease. This means that if you have 500 overall armor, you will now have a 50% damage reduction. Keep in mind that this doesn't include the other resistances that are present on armor, such as heavy armor being more resilient towards monsters. These resistances will be applied after the initial reduction, so heavy armor will still be quite useful when fighting monsters. All in all, the new combat system is a lot more fast-paced and far more unforgiving, so you truly need to be careful how you approach fights with big groups with enemies, and also use everything at your disposal to get the upper hand to succeed. That being said, let's go ahead and move on to the mechanics and scaling. Alright, we are now on to the mechanics and scaling, which in this section we will be discussing the improved soft lock system, how many skill points you gain from leveling, and how the entire game scales to your character. So let's go ahead and get started with the skill points. So to accommodate with the newfound challenges that come with the improved combat system, you will now by default get 2 skill points per level, and all skills will now be considered active once they are unlocked. You will no longer need to equip skills to have them active, which is a massive improvement that really allows you to experiment with different skills without having to focus on one skill in particular. This is very helpful and pretty much a necessity with the new combat system, as you really need to have everything at your disposal to succeed in combat. Keep in mind that you can change this back to 1 skill point per level in the options if you feel it's too powerful, or you can change it to give you more per level if you think it's too hard. I would recommend, as with most things with this mod, experimenting with it until you are satisfied, or simply leaving it at the default setting. Alright, moving on, let's discuss the changes to the soft lock system, which I really can't stress enough are absolutely amazing. So the original game had a pretty terrible soft lock system where it would choose a target to lock onto determined by how your character's facing and how close you were to them, and in my opinion it really didn't work that well. Now, however, you can actually change that, and you can either improve that system or you can completely turn it off. If you decide to use the improved soft lock, you are now able to control how it will lock onto creatures around you, dependent on how the camera's facing, your movement, your distance, and you're now able to control the priority of all of these factors, so you're truly able to control how it will lock onto creatures. So now you are actually able to really experiment with these until you find something you're comfortable with and how it locks onto your target. But if you are too lazy for all that, you can just take the easy method and toggle it off, and that means the way you swing is how your camera is facing. And this is a hell of a lot better than the original soft lock for sure, as you now have full control over where you're swinging and you direct your attack much better. But if you prefer the soft lock, then I recommend experimenting with the improved auto lock until you find a setting that suits you. So, as you might imagine, scaling has an absolutely huge effect on the game as a whole and is now definitely worth using. Essentially, this will scale up or down the entire game, including monsters, quests, and rewards to be around your level, meaning that you will now be able to do all quests and kill any creature or bosses at any time in the game, regardless of the recommended level. Quests and rewards are scaled directly to your level, however monsters can be scaled by 2 different formulas called dynamic and group scaling. Dynamic scaling will scale monsters to be close to your level, though this will depend on if they're in a large group or not. Monsters in a group will tend to be a lower level than you, however a lone monster will tend to be higher than you. Group scaling, on the other hand, will actually group monsters into different categories dependent on their base level and then scale them accordingly. Meaning that monsters with a higher base level will actually be a few levels higher than you, while monsters with a lower base level will actually be a few levels lower than you, making the game a bit of a challenge at the beginning, but a lot easier later on, while dynamic scaling remains fairly linear throughout the playthrough. Honestly, the new scaling system is an amazing idea, and at the end of the day, it really only makes sense. Geralt is a very old, veteran monster slayer, so monsters should all be pretty much equally as challenging now as they would be at the end of the game, so it only makes sense to have them around your level instead of being a fixed level. Alright, so meditation and alchemy have pretty much been completely changed from the original game, so let's go ahead and get started with meditation. So, meditation has now been changed to be more similar to the first and second Witcher, and now if you press the in or meditation button, you will now get down on your knees and actually light a campfire, as long as you either have wood in your inventory or you change the option in the menu to not require wood. If you, however, hold the meditate button, you will simply get down on your knees without lighting a campfire, which can be useful if you wish to conserve on wood or just need to change your skills. Speaking of which, you are now required to meditate to level up and improve skills, and you have to meditate with a campfire to be able to perform any alchemy, meaning that you can't just do that on the spot anymore, and you need to safely be meditating by a fire to do so. Keep in mind that you are able to use indoor fireplaces and campfires you find in the wilderness, so if you require wood to light campfires, it's probably a better idea to find an inn or to find a campfire elsewhere. Other useful features accessed from meditating is that you can now fast forward time in real time by holding the sprint button, which will quickly regenerate your health, and it gives you a rested bonus if you meditate for more than 6 hours. Also, if you apply any oils or drink potions while meditating, you will get more uses or extended time, which can be quite useful. If you hold the meditate button while already meditating, you will now bring up the meditating menu to instantly be able to pass time, which can be useful for the certain scenarios where that is needed, though you will not regenerate your health from doing so. To finally leave meditation, simply press the meditate button again and you will extinguish your campfire and stand up. But the campfire will remain there, so if you wish to return later to again conserve on firewood, you can do so. And now on to Alchemy, which has also been greatly changed, as you will now require the full recipe to be able to refill your potions, and you will now have to manually do so while meditating. Meaning you can no longer just meditate and have them automatically recharged with something like Dwarven Spirit. But don't worry, potion effects are now massively extended, so you can now use them long before battle and still have the effect long after battle, meaning that you will no longer need to use a lot of potions while in combat. Herbs are also changed and are now easier to loot, as they are now auto-looted and yield more per plant, so you won't have to worry too much about needing the entire recipe for your potions. Cap potions have also been completely changed and will no longer provide night vision. Instead, they will now give a boost to attack speed, while night vision is now always available to you. Night vision will now be toggleable with mouse button 4, which is much closer to the actual lore than using a potion. Keep in mind that you are able to change the hotkey for night vision under the key bindings in the game settings, so I recommend changing it to something that works better for you. Aside from that, a few potion effects have now also been changed to accommodate the new stats and combat system, so be sure to read all the new descriptions and to see how they can improve your gameplay, as they will be absolutely necessary for all encounters now. Overall, the new alchemy and meditation system feels far more realistic and just seems a lot better than the vanilla in my opinion, but as usual, everything with these is customizable, so be sure to check out the massive number of options available to you in the mods tab. Alright, we are nearing a conclusion, but there are a few other noteworthy things to mention, so here they are under the Miscellaneous section. Firstly, we now have the Bestiary fix, which is a nice addition that will update your Bestiary even if an ally happens to kill the monster in question. And this mainly only ever occurs on quests where you're helping out another Witcher or someone else kill something and they happen to kill it with their attack. Honestly, it doesn't happen that often, so this isn't the most useful thing in the world, but it's still kinda nice to have. Next up, you are now able to choose to remove the level requirement on armor, which is truly a matter of opinion. You may find it a bit overpowered though, so I would recommend keeping the level requirement on. And if you do, you can then choose how many levels you are different from your gear and still able to wear it, which can be quite useful. Along with that, you are now able to choose how your durability of your equipment works, so when you use the extreme setting, as your durability degrades, it will have a far more extreme effect on your weapon damage, so it's probably a good idea to bring along some repair kits and always repair your gear while in town. Okay, the final miscellaneous thing is that you can now control how stamina is used while sprinting on either foot or horseback, and you can now even toggle on or off fall damage if you choose to. And you will be able to use these under the options in the exploration tab, so go ahead and check that out if that is something you really wish to mess with, though honestly you should probably just leave it default as it will stay pretty balanced with the rest of the game, so I recommend doing that. So to sum it all up, The Witcher 3 Enhanced Edition truly fits the name to the absolute point. This mod completely overhauls many aspects of the game, from adding new stats and mechanics and even improving upon pre-existing mechanics, scaling the entire game to the character, balancing combat, and overhauling the meditation and alchemy. It's an absolutely fantastic mod that I really cannot recommend enough if you are looking to either replay The Witcher 3 or even play it for the first time. It truly does enhance all aspects of the game, and it makes for a very entertaining experience that I hope you will all try out for yourselves. Anyway, that is it for me today. Thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed this spotlight, then be sure to go check out the mod page in the description and go download it and install it immediately. I guarantee you will enjoy it. Also, be sure to leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you wish to see more content from me in the future. I do other Let's Plays on the side and maybe more mod spotlights in the future, so go ahead and check out my channel if you're curious, and yeah, I will see you guys in the next video.